Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 6 of the MRX Lab, show from FlexMR, where this year we're on a mission to uncover the value created by the brilliant people in our industry and how they bring that value into their organisations. Today, I'm really lucky to be joined by Shanice Mitchell, Marketing Insight Manager at APMG International. Welcome, Shanice.
Thanks for having me on the show today, Mike. I'm so delighted to be here. So thank you for your invite.
No worries. Thank you so much for joining me. So to kick off today's episode, Shanice, I'd love to hand it over to you just to give yourself a brief background and your journey within research.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I started working in customer service when I was 19, so 11 years ago, not giving away my age. And I was working with customers daily, solving problems and helping with inquiries. And I've done that in multiple industries, in the healthcare industry, the automotive industry, and now I work in the professional education industry. I think when I was working in the healthcare industry, it gives you an understanding of empathy and urgency like no other. So when I moved from healthcare into then automotive, you can take those skills that you've built from that industry and apply it to other situations. So a little example about that, obviously I used to work with patients. Moving into automotive, I was working with complaints that couldn't be contained at customer service level. So they were the complaints that were addressed to the 3 CEOs of the car manufacturer. You have to handle them with extreme care because they've already been managed by customer service and they've obviously had a poor resolution, which is why they've come to you. So it's really important that when you get these complaints or queries, you address them with that same urgency. And I've been able to take that as like a transferable skill from healthcare into ultimately automotive and now into the professional education industry. At the same time, I started studying at the Open University, doing a business degree. And I studied a module about consumer behaviour. And at first, I wasn't really interested. I kind of wanted to know the marketing side, the core areas of business. And when I started studying that module, I realised how important the customer is in any business, in any industry. Actually, people and humans drive our decision making. So that's where my passion started for insights and customers, is that, how do I apply that customer service, that customer care, the empathy, the urgency into, helping businesses make decisions based on what our customers are doing.
Absolutely. And I think just honing on that a little bit, given your background coming through sort of customer service, then moving into insight from an educational background as well, it's given you a great outlook and on the importance of the customer and customer think. It sounds like you're very customer centric in just terms of your individual thinking. How do you think that's developed within your current role at APMG International?
I think it's really important to remember that every stakeholder is a customer. So obviously working from customer service, you have a very people-focused lens, understanding real frustrations, the motivations of why they're purchasing your products and expectations up close, directly from your customer's mouth. That has helped me shaped my belief when it moves into insight, is that it's not just about data. It's about human truth. So data can tell us something and we can make a story of that. We have our own biases of what we believe in an organization and individually. So we kind of come to the table with a bias. And actually, I think there's the human truth there, is that if your customer's telling you something, but the data's telling you another thing, which one do you listen to? And I think we need to listen to both, because the customer is telling you, this is what I feel. And that is probably the most important thing, is the feelings. Whenever we purchase something, I was explaining to one of my friends the other day, you even feel something when you go and purchase a loaf of bread. It might be familiarity, it might be brand recognition, it might be those things. But if you compare that to the feeling of buying a house, let's say, the feelings drastically come to play when you're buying a house. So I think it's really important that in insight, we match that with feelings, and we get that from the human side of our customers. In addition to that, I think we also forget that we are customers when we're sat in our insight teams or in our marketing teams. We are customers. We have consumer behavior that we can analyze. And in addition, we are also customers to our employers. And that is something that is overlooked quite a lot. We have a workplace culture. We have communication that we're expected to pass around. And our employers, when they look for us to improve their business, they're looking for a specific thing, the customer, which is us. I think bringing all these mindsets together, looking at yourself as a customer, the human truth, the insight, and then applying them to, marketing, projects, changes within business, even down to like employee engagement. It's one big customer ecosystem. And that's something that us as insight managers have to understand. It's not just the data that we're seeing on a dashboard. These are driven by people.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think you made an interesting point there to start off with, is that your stakeholders are customers as well. Like, I think having that mindset of just like, how can I bring that those stakeholders value as if they were customers, is probably something that a lot of teams could learn from in different organizations, and might be able to shift their perspective to something similar to yours. Yeah. You mentioned before about transitioning into insights from the fact that you went to the Open University, you did a module on consumer behavior. How have you found that transition from learning about consumer behavior at university to actually applying it in your role?
Absolutely. I think there were so many transferable skills from what I was learning at uni and my previous customer experience I'd gained over my career. I think university gave me like the foundational theory. So this is how you do this in your workplace. But when you actually try and put that into workplace, like I said, we're working with humans here. Real life is not as simple as what you're reading on the textbook, So most importantly, consumers don't behave like case studies. I wish sometimes they did, but they definitely don't. We all contradict ourselves. We change our opinions quickly, and emotion plays a huge part in our purchasing behavior as a consumer. So having other skills, empathy, is a huge thing. Emotional awareness, managing your stakeholders' expectations, those sorts of things can only be applied in the workplace. So putting myself out there, asking to volunteer on projects, taking on new things to get that real world application was so important. Uni provided me with the, foundational theory, understanding it, but actually it's so important to apply this in a timely manner as well. That's the most important thing I would say here. If you are in university, see if you can volunteer for a project, help a community out, work in a charity. It's incredible how quickly our brain forgets things or pushes them to the back of our mind to take in more information. So it's really important that when you're learning it, you're trying to apply it, even if it's not in a corporate world. Try and volunteer for something, because you really need to be able to understand why you're applying it and all the other expectations that come with it. It's not just a case study,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I learned coming out of university as well, is that like a lot of the things you actually learn are just theoretical and don't really work too much in practice. There's always a bit of wiggle room in terms of figuring it out. And I think you made a very good point on the fact that it's not necessarily like the hard skills you learn at university that maybe contribute to being successful in insights. I think there's a lot of soft traits that can lead someone to being successful, which I think is one of the best reasons why, market research or something in that vein is a really good career for a lot of people, but they don't often find it until they say come out of uni or they go into uni and maybe, I came from a background in psychology and always wanted to go into something psychology related. And then I pivoted into marketing in my master's, and my background in psychology, maybe some of them soft skills like you mentioned, empathy, came into play when you're thinking about consumer behavior. So I think you made some really good points there. Just on that topic, what other skills and traits do you think are important to an insight manager role and to be successful within a business like APMG International?
Yeah, I definitely think curiosity. I always say to my team, just put my curiosity hat on. You have to ask why. And even when you ask why, you need to have good follow-up questions that prompt thinking. Not everybody has the insight in their role at the forefront of their mind, So having those good questions that can encourage answers or even just prompt further discussions around it. So definitely curiosity. Storytelling with data. It's the same sort of reasoning as to why. Not everybody understands data. If you give somebody an Excel spreadsheet who doesn't work in Excel, for example, and you ask them to transform that data and tell a story, it's really difficult. So making sure you're telling your data story to the correct audience for their understanding, that's really important, that you're providing graphs and visuals, asking them how they like to understand data. In addition to that, stakeholder and project management, even though you might not be actively managing a project yourself, understanding the basic levels of stakeholder management and, in addition, project management will just make your life a little bit easier when you are in your full-time role. I would say the next one comes quite hand in hand is communication and confidence. We all need to communicate as effectively as possible. We work in a virtual world. Communicating in person is so different to communicating in Teams. I always ask my team, have you asked them their preferred method of communication? Because I think we just assume people read Teams messages every hour, on the hour, or emails. You should ask your colleagues how they prefer to receive that information. How do they manage their urgent comms is probably really nice conversation starter if you're about to work on a project together. And then I mentioned confidence. This is something I think we all actively can continue to build across our whole careers. But often it's important to remember that you are the voice of the customer in the room, and you need to be comfortable challenging senior members of staff about decision makings, especially if it's going to impact the customers or stakeholders of the business, your employees, your team members. Having that confidence to just start small and share your insight and question it is definitely a skill I would invest in.
Absolutely. And I think one that you mentioned then was communication.
Mm-hmm.
I guess given your background in customer service, ultimately communication would have been a huge part of your role. Do you think that's helped you in transitioning into insights? The fact that you had to communicate so well in a previous role, and like you mentioned, like storytelling with the data, being able to communicate differently to different audiences, which I'm sure is something that you learned within your customer service role. Do you reckon that has helped you massively within insights?
Yeah, absolutely. I think managing a frustrated customer, I will never forget, there was one patient, this was in my healthcare career, and there was one patient that kept shouting and saying, I need help, I need some help, I need some help. And it's like nobody was listening, and just taking that moment to come back and communicate back to him, I am listening to you. Tell me what you need from me, because nobody was listening or communicating back to him. The moment you just stopped for a second and listened to what he had to say and communicate that you're understanding what he's saying, that empathy, the active communication, I will call it, the care, that sets you up to continuously think like that in that loop. Not even in work, just in general, communication, we all get it wrong. We all get it right most of the time, but we all get it wrong. And I think it's something that we should all take on, that we should learn to communicate better, even more so with AI, the rise of AI. We are seeing so much copy, communication, emails being regenerated via AI. You can recognize it. So it's so important that as a human in an AI revolution, we hear the voice of a human, we communicate as a human, because you will just start filtering it out. We think about how many advertisements we see a day. How many emails do we see a day? Are we giving that communication the best 5 minutes of our concentration in a world where we're flooded by AI communication? It's only going to enhance. So improving your own communication skills, how you communicate, will set those expectations of how people communicate with you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think going back to one of your original points about just viewing your stakeholders as customers and given your background in customer service, and like you just mentioned, like an anecdotal scenario of when you had to communicate with a patient within when you were working for a healthcare company. I think that provides you with like the empathy of knowing how to communicate as well to your stakeholders when you see them as a customer. Like, how best can I help you almost understand this? So I think that's a really good point, but I think it's also geared towards you as a person, given the fact that you're so customer centric. And I think a lot of teams could learn from that in many ways. You did touch on an interesting topic there, which was AI. And I just wonder, how much has that helped you in your role? How much did you have to use that previously? And where do you think the future lies for it for yourself and just in general?
Yeah, I think with any industry now is experiencing the rise of AI, so learning it and understanding how it works is really important, especially in an insight role, because it can speed up the work, freeing up our time to actually focus on, building skills, engaging with stakeholders, things that AI just can't do. So for things like, text analysis, trend spotting, summarization, I would definitely use AI. But also, I think AI sometimes helps me understand that I can come at things from a bias. We all have a bias. We definitely have that in our writing, in our communication, and in our presenting data, storytelling. So it does help call me out sometimes. It can pick up different shifts in how I'm working, the patterns that I'm noticing, especially if I've been close to a campaign, or in a project. You have a bias towards the work that you're doing. So I think it's really useful to remove some of the bias and look at it from different perspectives. However, and I will always say this with AI is only powerful when it's led by people who know how to understand it, who understand how it works, how it learns from you, that safety element that you need to consider as an insight manager using AI. If you are putting data through it, you have to be 100% confident that you are not breaking any policies, you are using this in an ethical manner. Emotional intelligence also comes into play here, I think. As a human when to dig deeper into something, when to challenge it and when to pause it. An AI machine does not know when to do that. The algorithm cannot replicate emotional intelligence. So insight isn't just about what's being said, it's about what's being felt, like I said earlier. And only a human can feel that. So just circling back, AI is so powerful and it will grow. It will continue to grow as the years go on, as we develop more faster technology. But it will always need a human to be the other side of it, to think of it from an ethical perspective and how we can continue to work in collaboration together, not AI just driving the force and us inputting stuff into it. The future of AI, I reckon there's going to be a lot more in terms of feedback loops, predictive insights, AI-powered communities, and engaging your B2B customers through AI platforms. There's loads of things that I could probably talk about, but yeah, I think consideration around the ethical use of AI in an insight role should always be at the forefront of our mind. Do I trust what I'm putting into this machine? You know, if this was to go anywhere else, would I feel comfortable with that? That's a question I always ask myself if I'm using it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you touch on an interesting point there of that it's always got to be human using it as a tool for them rather than
Yeah,
it doing the work for you almost. You know, like
100%.
you bring in text analysis there. Obviously, it's a painstaking process for a human to do it, just in terms of the time cost. But you know, the good thing that you see it doing is it's giving you back that time. And I would always advocate for people to check it over themselves. You know, like you said, a lot of the emotional intelligence is lost within AI a lot of times. So yeah, always use it as maybe a checker rather than something to do the work for you.
Agree. I got told to use it as a digital assistant instead of my brain,
Yes,
and
exactly.
since switching to that mindset,
Yeah,
it's really helped.
I think that's a really good mindset that a lot of people can take forward rather than it being something that's going to replace you or you're allowing it to replace a lot of the parts of your job.
Yeah.
So yeah, just to finish off, we are coming to the end of this episode. And the last thing that I do like to ask at the end of every episode is, can you think of anything that you've learned from your journey, from customer service or studying academically, in the industry that's helped you be more successful, that you'd like to impart on the audience? That they might find valuable, maybe for those at the start of their career, maybe they're just stuck in the middle of it. Just anything that you think would, help someone out.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I would say in 2025, any skills, soft and hard skills, are your currency. Communication, emotional intelligence, relationship building, communicating, learn, keep learning, become a lifelong learner, because you don't just leave university and stop learning. Unfortunately, you continue learning, and it is not unfortunately, it's definitely fortunately. I think we leave uni and it's like, oh yeah, I don't have to read any more books. You do, because that is what keeps you ahead of the game. It keeps you up to date with trends, whether it's data tools, emerging tech, behavioral science, neuroscience of the brain. Learn, because that is invaluable. You can teach others, and I always say learning is better done together. So if you find something out, share your insight, volunteer to give a talk on something, because we can learn so much from each other if we just stop and listen and communicate back, in a good way, in a good, positive way. So keep learning and build those skills.
Absolutely. I think that's an excellent place to end today's episode, Shanice. Thank you so much for joining me today. And for those listening at home, I've been your host, Mike Connor, and we'll be back next month with another brilliant guest to discover how they're facing the challenges in our industry and to continue bringing value into their organizations. Thank you so much for listening, guys, and see you next time.